Yeah, so we at the top of our conversation, we talked about the possibility of sex differences as being kind of taboo from polite company, and in a lot, I'll give another example, and this is kind of connects to our this conversation, is in a lot of academia, there's just capitalism is just a dirty word, and or sometimes now called neoliberalism. And a certain percentage, surprisingly large percentage of academics are actually Marxists, probably about 15% in the social sciences. And to say the obvious fact that capitalism is better than communism, I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, just compare, would you rather live in South Korea or North Korea? Would you rather live in the old East Germany or West Germany? Would you rather live now in Venezuela or in Chile? And it's just obvious that capitalism makes people richer and freer and better off in pretty much every way. Now, that's a fact that's almost unmentionable in academia. Now, but if you say it by itself and suddenly people discover it for the first time, then you can get the extreme right-wing position that any amount of regulation is bad, any amount of social spending is bad. We need the most extreme form of almost anarcho-capitalism, like radical libertarianism. And that's because I argue that if you never have a discussion of the relative advantages and disadvantages of different economic systems, you never hear the arguments for why some mixture of a free market with regulation of things that have to be regulated because the market won't take care of them, like pollution. I mean, the market just won't put a price on the atmosphere because no one owns the atmosphere. And so having a combination of a free market with environmental regulations gives you the best of both worlds. Likewise, social spending for the elderly, for children, for the sick, for the unlucky, that's not incompatible with a free market. And in fact, some of the countries with the strongest social safety nets also are the ones with the most economic freedom. So that argument that I've just given you right now just doesn't take place because there's just such a commitment to the idea that capitalism is bad, opening up the possibility that someone discovers, hey, capitalism isn't so bad, then they leap to the strongest possible conclusion. Well, as soon as you have Social Security, then we're going to be like Venezuela or carbon pricing. And the rational way of organizing society with just the right balance of free markets, regulation, and social spending is just something that doesn't get discussed out in the open. You get these polarized extremes. Anyway, that's the argument that I made.
What's the origin of that thought process in academia? Like, why has capitalism been demonized and socialism been praised, despite all the evidence that, especially Marxist socialism or Marxism, is just it's never been shown to be effective, and it's been shown to be very dangerous?
Yeah, it's a good question. One theory from Thomas Sowell, an economist at the Hoover Institution, is that intellectuals tend to like systems where you can articulate a theory in a bunch of verbal propositions, and the government kind of implements them. Whereas there are certain phenomena in social life, like market economies, where the intelligence is distributed across millions of people. No one actually knows how to make the system work, but people make things, look for buyers, they set the price where people will buy them, and then over the entire society, things kind of work out, but no single individual has the theory as to how that ought to work. A language is another example. I mean, there's no committee that designed the English language. There's no theory of how the English language ought to work. It's like hundreds of millions of people just talking, and they invent new slang, and they slur, and they emphasize, and they borrow from other languages, and the language changes, and it works pretty well. Here we are speaking in English, and no committee ever designed it. So according to Sowell's theory, and I think he was influenced by Friedrich Hayek, the Austrian economist, that systems of distributed intelligence, where no one genius ever designed it, but millions of people cooperating give rise to a collective intelligence, kind of run against the grain of the way intellectuals often think. Not all intellectuals, because of course you could do what Hayek and Sowell did and realize there is this phenomenon of collective intelligence. But if your first impulse is, what's the theory? What are the set of principles? Then you're going to gravitate to planned hyper-planned systems and be a little bit oblivious to distributed systems. it. So there was an idea, sometimes called social Darwinism. It had nothing to do with Darwin, ironically, but the idea that the only way societies progress is through ruthless, cutthroat competition, and poor people are just dragging the species down, and screw them. And if we're bleeding hearts, then we'll retard the progress of society, and we need just everyone against everyone else to advance. Now, that's really not a very good way to organize a society, but there's such a reaction against that in the 20th century that you got the opposite extreme, that we are all blank slates, that is, we all start off identical, and that any kind of competition is bad. You need kind of the benevolent government to distribute everything in the fairest possible manner. Now, the reality is something in between. There's going to be inequality in any fair system simply because some people really are smarter than others, and some people have more discipline and more self-control. And it's good to harness that so that our competitive impulses have some people burning the midnight oil and racking their brains to how to make things better off because they anticipate some rewards. You don't want to sap all incentives, which is kind of what happened in the Soviet Union. You also don't want a central committee to decide that everyone has to have the same amount and parcel out every reward, because that just gives too much power to a government. But it also doesn't mean that you have the opposite extreme where if the poor people die, then it's their own fault because they're lazy and stupid. I mean, that's just it's not true. It's not humane. And what we need to do is find the right balance between competition and freedom that makes everyone better off, and recognition that there are going to be people who are not as smart, but they don't deserve to starve. There are people who are just going to be unlucky because a lot of wealth isn't distributed by talent and hard work, but there's a lot of luck that goes into it as well. And so we may want to kind of sand down some of the sharp edges of competition there. And it doesn't have to be either or. And the thing is, if you make one position taboo, then that makes things either or. What happens is that in some politicized debates, the people don't so much care about the truth. They care about what belief will earn them esteem in their peer group.
Right.
Now, this is human psychology, but it's really bad when it comes to arriving at the best understanding of the truth collectively. And what we need, both in the left-wing academic departments and the right-wing think tanks, is kind of recognition. We're probably all wrong about a lot of things, especially if we talk to each other and act like kind of litigators, like lawyers who mount the best possible case for our side to prosecute it against the other side. That's just not a good way of arriving at the truth.